like most things that are people who are early in their career, making career changes, etc. And while we're letting everybody in, I would love to see if everybody can drop your name and location in the chat. And if you have one, what's the most interesting interview question that you've been asked? Let's see those in the chat. Well, I'll tell you while we're waiting, the most interesting interview question that I've been asked is, tell me about a time that you've been publicly berated. This was a strange question. I was interviewing for a retail manager position at an Apple store many moons ago, and found it really interesting. I think the interviewers were trying to get at, how does this person maintain their composure if someone's going off? This was in New York City. And it happened quite a lot. So it made sense why they would want to know a little bit about this. I shared a good example, and we'll talk a little bit about how to share examples to interview questions a little bit later today. We'll go through formal intros here in a bit, but for those of you just joining, my name's Jordan. I'm a recruiter here at Dropbox in the Emerging Talent team, and we are here for the behavioral interview prep workshop. A few housekeeping things to think about. Please keep your mics muted. You're more than welcome to drop your questions in the chat. And we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the presentation as well. Let's see. The session is meant to be interactive. There will be some interactive portions a little bit through, kind of a workshop to talk about how best to prepare your interview answers. So we'll go through that. So feel free, leave emojis, comments, questions in the chat, and we will try to get through most of them as well. And this session will be recorded, and it's going to be presented on our Talent Board website. So with that, let's get started. I would love for my amazing colleagues here to introduce themselves. Let's start with you, Jenna.
Hello, everyone. I am Jenna. I'm a recruiter, and I'm in Austin, Texas.
Awesome.
Cool. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Lexi, also a recruiter based in Austin. So a lot of Texas rep here, but excited to be with y'all today.
Nice. Well, we've got an action-packed schedule for you today, talking all things behavioral interviews. We've got a question here that, what is the one thing that the COVID pandemic has taught you? That's an interesting question. And it sounds like someone else says, if you could be any dessert, what would I be? So yes, you might get some questions that will throw you off in an interview, and maybe you didn't prepare for that one specific question. We've got some really exciting content today to help you kind of how to approach situations and put your best foot forward, even when you might be thrown off by the question. So let's go over to the next slide. Yes, thank you. So first, what is a behavioral interview? Behavioral interviews are the classic question is, tell me about a time when. They're designed to show you, or to show a team, how someone demonstrated a specific skill or behavior in a situation. The questions are generally targeted for a specific role based on the criteria determined by a hiring team. So in my example previously, I was interviewing to be a Genius Bar manager at a very busy Apple store. And a lot of times customers will come in upset and not happy with their service. And so they asked me to tell them about a time that I was publicly berated, to get a sense of how do I handle situations like that, where you might be put in a similar situation like that. I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, but it was definitely an interesting interview question. And the format that we're going to show you a little bit later will help you prepare for any type of question that comes your way by following a standardized format. In behavioral interviews, candidates share concrete examples of work that they have previously done and how they were able to get it done. This is also a really good opportunity to share what you have learned through the process and what you would do differently. Next slide there, Lexi, thank you. So why do companies use, oh, sorry, go back one more. Thanks. Why do companies use behavioral interviews? So it's a structured approach. It's based in research, and it's the idea that past behavior can predict future behavior. And that's what hiring teams are really trying to understand is how does your experience lend itself useful for the role, and how can we use this time together to get a sense of how you will perform in the role under certain scenarios. The interviewer can actually get an idea of how you approach a situation, how you might approach it in the future, and the hiring teams will create questions based on the specific needs of the role that they're hiring for. Another really great part about a behavioral interview is it ensures a more consistent experience among candidates. If all interviewers are asking the same question, tell me about a time when, and they're getting different answers, the teams can then compare those candidates in a lot more of a level playing field. And another nice benefit of this is each question is related to the actual functions of the role. So I don't know about what dessert would you be, if that would be related to the functions of the role or not, but sometimes people will also throw in kind of quirky questions just to get a sense of your creativity or how you respond to something like that. Next slide, Lex, for the do's and don'ts. So do's and don'ts of behavioral interviews. These are just some recommendations that we put together from our team on how to approach the seemingly daunting idea of what questions are they going to ask me in these interviews. So first and foremost, don't try to anticipate the potential list of questions from your interviewers. Who would ever think that tell me what kind of dessert you would be, or even the example that someone else shared about what's something that you learned from COVID. If you're always trying to anticipate what questions are going to get thrown your way, it's an infinite amount of studying and preparation that you can do. So what we recommend is prepare by reflecting on 3 to 4 impactful situations from your experience. We generally recommend that these scenarios are relevant to the role that you're applying and interviewing for, but students like yourselves may be early in your careers. So that means experience from your clubs, your school projects, your hackathons, that all counts as experience towards the role. It's a lot easier to adapt 3 to 4 experiences that you know really well that you've prepared for to many questions that could come your way than to try to anticipate every question that's going to come your way. Make sure you're elaborating on your responses. I think Jenna, Lexi, and myself have all been in situations where we're really excited about a candidate and the candidate will answer a question and you have to follow up with many questions to really get at the essence of what they're saying. Make sure you're elaborating on your responses and not giving simple 1-word or simple 1-sentence or 2-sentence responses. We're going to cover this a little bit later on how is a good way to format your responses, but just keep that top of mind. The interview is really looking for you to set the stage and to walk through what you actually did in these situations. You also want to balance this. You don't want to ramble. I have a tendency to ramble sometimes. Rambling can also be kind of a sign that that the team sees as someone who's not concise in their communication, isn't really thinking about what the interviewer is asking, and isn't able to provide a concise response. So it's a balance, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to balance that later. Make sure you, oh, sorry, one more, go back, Lex. Make sure you understand the question and take the time to answer the question. Sometimes we will get candidates who will answer a question that we didn't even ask. And it might be nerves, it might be lack of preparation. This is totally normal sometimes in interviews, especially if you're just getting started in interviews. So make sure you take the time to really understand the question and understand what the meaning behind the question is when you're formatting your response. It's okay to ask your interviewer some clarifying questions before you respond. And it's also okay to take a moment to think about your response before you respond. Make sure you're honest about your experience with the follow-up questions that can come in. A lot of times people will be really interested in what you shared with them, and they will ask some follow-up questions. So always make sure that you're honest about your experience and try not to exaggerate, because it could come back and come across as being disingenuous or inauthentic. And then lastly, include any relevant data points. A lot of companies really think about what's the impact of the work that you're doing and the work that you've done. And so if you can share relevant data points about the impact of the specific example that you're sharing, it just helps set the stage a little bit more. And it really shows to hiring teams that you're someone who's data-driven and looks to continually improve your work through relevant data points. So that's another really great tip. So let's talk about some examples of questions that you might come across. Tell me about a project where you had a large personal responsibility or outcome. Tell me about a time when you had to change someone's mind on something, and how did you convince them? Describe a time you had to give feedback to a team member to help them improve. Tell me about a time you advocated for something because you felt it was important. And then something like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Now, at first glance, what are your strengths and weaknesses might not exactly sound like, tell me about a time when. But if you can share an example of your strength and weakness, share an example of your strength and or weakness alongside what you're identifying, that's really good signal to the hiring teams that you're someone who is very self-aware and also thinking about how these strengths and weaknesses are incorporated to your work. Side note, these are some of the questions from our Dropbox behavioral interview for our intern and new grads. So if any of you all make it there, you might want to write these down. So you might be thinking, next slide, Lex. You might be thinking, great, this sounds amazing, but when I get into the interview situation, I freeze. I forget what I'm saying. I ramble. I lose track of where I'm at in my story. Well, the good news is there's a really simple format that you can follow and adapt your answers to, and it's called the STAR interview response format. If you do a Google search of this, if you do a YouTube video search of this, there's a lot of really amazing content to help you practice and understand this format a little bit more. We're going to be going into this kind of through a workshop model here in the next few minutes. And this is going to be maybe for some of you an intro to the STAR format. Some of you might know this format already and be really well versed in it. But I do recommend, this is just a kind of a crash course over the next hour that we're going to be talking about these things. So I definitely recommend to search Google, YouTube, all of the different places you go for different content. I think LinkedIn Learning has some really great content about interviewing as well to continue to hone this. So essentially what this is called the STAR format. And it's broken down an acronym of situation, task, action, and result. So for the situation, you're kind of telling a story to your interviewer. Talk about the background, provide the context. Where did this happen? When did this happen? And sort of set the stage for the interviewer and the story that you're about to tell. Next, you'll move into the task. So what were the challenges and expectations of you? What needed to be done here and why? This is the idea that you identify the problem and you kind of talk about why it's important at this point. And then you talk about your specific action. So what actions did you actually take? Who did you actually work with? How did you do this? What tools did you use? And this is kind of the, here's exactly what I did in this. A lot of times people will say, tell me about a time when X, Y, Z, and interviewees will jump right to the action. if you can step it back a few steps and set the stage, you're going to be telling a lot more compelling story before you get to that action point. And then talk about the results. As I mentioned before, data points are really important here. Explain the results, the accomplishments, the recognitions, any sort of savings maybe you helped the company achieve. It's really important to quantify the results. Kind of sharing like, yeah, and everybody felt good about it afterwards is nice, but is there a way that you can measure how everybody felt good and put that into your response? Now, the nice part about this is the results don't always have to be a success. The idea is that you are telling something that's a success, but as you grow in your career, you'll recognize that there's some really big challenges that companies have over time. And they may not always be successful. Your action may not always be successful. So if it is something that you would have liked to have done even better, follow up in the results and share an example of how you would have done it differently down the line. I think this shows a lot of ability to self-reflect, to be a critical thinker, and also some emotional intelligence as well. So let's see. We are going to go through, there's some really great questions in the chat. And we are actually going to go into breakouts here for the next 20 minutes or so. It's going to be myself, Lexi, and Jenna, and we're going to be workshopping this idea of tell me about a time you had to overcome a challenge in the breakout format. We're going to go through each of these examples, and hopefully you all are comfortable sharing as well. So Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind putting us into the breakout rooms, and then each of us are going to walk through this, and we'll come back around 12:40 or so and do a Q&A. You can share everything that you learned with us, and then we'll do a 20-minute Q&A with Lexi, Jenna, and myself to answer whatever burning questions on your mind.
Hi, everyone. Did you need help going into your breakout rooms? Let me know if you need any help, okay? Hi, Sandy. Oh, it looks like you're still connecting to audio. Hi, Sandy. We're actually going to be assigning you to a breakout room. So I'll go ahead and move you over to one of them. Hi, everyone. Let me know if you need any help being put in your breakout rooms. Thank you. Hi, Zi Ying. This is, oh, Hi, Hung. Thank you for joining us today for our workshop. They are currently in breakout rooms to discuss the STAR method for behavioral interviews. So I can go ahead and put you in a breakout room, but just note that the breakout rooms will end in about 6 minutes, okay?
Yeah, okay. Actually, I was once in the Jordan's breakout room, but I accidentally disconnected from due to the internet problem. So yeah, can I
Oh,
rejoin that?
oh yeah, which group were you part of, Jordan?
Jordan, I think.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll go ahead and assign you there.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
think the other group should be coming back in.
Recorded.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully that time in your breakout was fruitful. Hopefully you learned something and maybe heard some really good examples from some of your peers and colleagues of things that they've had to work through. So we got about 20 minutes left here and want to make sure that there's plenty of time for Q&A. So this is an open format Q&A. We'd like to keep it more towards behavioral interviewing, but if you have other questions as well, we are happy to answer them. And I just want to see if we have anything in the chat already for questions. I think Charbel had, how do you tweak the weaknesses question so it doesn't sound like you're putting yourself down? And I'd love to know, Jenna or Lexi, if you have any wisdom here for this question.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Again, the strengths weaknesses one, I think always good to have those prepared going into any sort of interview. I think the main goal here is, at the end of the day, nobody's perfect. We're humans, but this is a really great opportunity to kind of give some insight to the interviewer about yourself, where maybe there's something that, you being self-aware is also really important, right? So this is an opportunity for them to get some insight about your self-awareness in areas of improvement. And although it's a weakness, maybe what are the steps that you're taking to proactively improve that and approach that? It could be personal, it could be professional. For example, like time management could be one. So it could be, I've recognized that the day just sometimes escapes me and I get kind of stuck in a rut and busy with things. And then, just showing some more actionable results of, I've learned to block my calendar. And this has been a really helpful approach to take, where it keeps me focused and organized. And I know every day at 11 a.m., this is when I'm focused on this project work, and it helps me transition. And this has, been really a really helpful approach for me to work on, this area of for myself. So always be thinking about, an area, and a weakness is really just an area of opportunity. And, always having an example to share about how you're actionably working through that to improve would be my advice there.
Thanks, Lex. Sarab, great question. Any resources that can help me practice behavioral interviews? First and foremost, putting yourself out there and going through the interviews themselves. There's no amount of resources and training that is just getting out there and doing it. And don't be afraid of putting yourself out there and just going through it. Even if you really didn't nail it on that interview, I think we all have examples of those. You're exactly where you're supposed to be, and the right opportunity will come there. So I'd recommend just putting yourself out there. And then if you have a mentor, a manager, maybe your company has a recruiting team that you could work with. If any of you are students, the career services centers in your schools and universities and boot camps may have resources for you to be able to book some time with a career professional and help you kind of put these things into practice. And then I'm a big fan of YouTube. Just watch YouTube videos, hear from everybody else's experience, and just start to see how that can be folded into how you want to show up in interviews.
I would also just I think those are all super great recommendations of just approaching any of this. If you are, let's say you're super interested in a specific role, it's always great to kind of have some of those practice rounds and things, but always make sure you're reviewing the job description, those bulleted requirements, preferred requirements, or just kind of responsibilities in the day-to-day. if you go through line by line and really have some good, clear examples of, how you have experience or what you would do in potential situations and scenarios, taking some time to go through line by line and having, some good talking points and examples is always a helpful approach for like more of a specific job. So make sure you are taking the time to like prepare and tailor your approach for each job as well.
Jen, anything you'd add there?
I think you guys did a great job of, I think a lot of it goes back to you coming up with that like 3 to 4 scenarios. And so to prepare, you could just kind of go through those scenarios and how you would answer questions, kind of think about it. What Lexi said, look at the job posting and maybe think of your 3 or 4 scenarios and how can I have those scenarios apply to what I'm seeing in the posting of what's required, what would be preferred, and just really kind of stretch those muscles of really thinking about what you've done and how it applies and why, how it correlates.
Right.
Yeah.
Lex, this might be a good one for you. How do you balance explaining the technical context or general background of your situation while still answering the question?
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, I think for a lot of you on the call, might be more STEM majors and things like that, right? So a lot of your examples might be from a specific class project or something like that. We were talking in our group like that situation piece, that's really like your initial, that should be like the most succinct, essentially, right? You're really just like setting the stage. So giving enough context to explain, right? What you're going to be sharing about. Was it a class? Was it a personal project? And unless you are speaking directly to an engineer, keep it high level. If they have more specific questions, they're going to follow up to clarify. So I would say keep it high level, like you are speaking, to somebody that might not be as well-versed in what you were working on. So I would say like sometimes it is best to just, have a really good succinct answer, an overview of what your technical project was about. And again, those clarifying questions will get asked, and that will kind of be a good entry point to help you further elaborate and then, get more detailed as that goes on. But again, that situational piece is really like a succinct entrance of just like setting the stage, giving some context, and then you can get more detailed from there.
I think it can be helpful to like Lexi was saying, with that piece of just signaling to your interviewer, like, I'm going to kind of give you some general details about the example that I'm sharing. If you have any specific questions about the more technical aspects, I'm happy to go into those, and just, again, use that in your setting of the stage. So the interviewer knows that you're aware you're providing a general response for the sake of time, for the sake of brevity. And then if they, like Lex was saying, if they do want to ask more questions, they'll be able to follow up if they find that it's important to the story. So we've got a question here. What if there comes any question that we don't have an idea about? For example, how would you convince your colleague to follow your approach? And how would you answer that? Anybody want to take this? So I think how I would, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would give some examples like past examples, like this thing goes, doing this, giving this results. So we might approach this method, like using some data or data, something like that. We can do that.
I like that. Yeah, I think you always want to try to include actual examples. However, if you freeze and they ask you this question, and they ask you this question and you're not quite sure how to answer it, it's kind of future casting a little bit. So be honest about how you would approach that. And say, you know, I really like to be consensus driven when I'm working with people and build sustainable relationships. And so I would get to understand their perspective a little bit more, ask them questions and see if they had any relevant data points to convince me of something different than how I'm thinking. And then I would share my point as well and give them data points on how I'm feeling so that we both feel like we're heard and we're both part of solving the problem. And then hopefully we can come to an agreement on which solution is the best to go down. And then if you have an example, you could say, for example, a time where that happened was, and share specific details about it. That's great. But if you don't, and it's an interview question where they're kind of asking you, what would future you do in this situation? Just be honest. What's important to you when you're trying to get someone to follow your own approach? How do you persuade others? And be honest about that. I wouldn't recommend saying I haven't encountered this. I think that kind of shows with the interviewer can sometimes show a lack of depth or a lack of experience or reflection. And it's okay if you don't have that example, but I wouldn't paint yourself as saying, I don't know. I would just really go confidently in how you kind of think about situations like that in your career. And these things, these questions, as you grow in your career, will become a lot easier to answer because these are things that happen every day as you grow in your experience. Okay, I think we got time for one more. Who's just been waiting to ask a question and hasn't put it in the chat yet? Or you can go live too. Okay, well, with that, we've got some good news. We're going to be doing a one-on-one workshop for 3 lucky people today, and Jennifer's been nice enough to choose the winners here. So we've got Charbel, you're a winner. Eunice, or I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing these right, Eunice Mustafa and Raliat Akasode will be the winners, and we will get back with you. I'm not sure how exactly we're going to coordinate that, but we will coordinate it somehow. And thank you for everybody's time today. Let me see if there's anything else. Thank you so much to Lexi and Jenna, of course. Thank you so much to the Talent Board team. We've got our winners, and look out for emails from Talent Board to register for our next session on technical interviewing taking place this Thursday, 2 days. There's a technical interviewing workshop, and we'll see you then. Thanks all. Oh, Jennifer will connect us to the winners so that we can set up that one-on-one workshop. So have a great afternoon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much
you.
for the
Bye.
opportunity.
Please, before we go,